These days, he exudes confidence as a proud father and husband of the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, but that confidence is hard won. Growing up gay in rural Michigan wasn't easy. He released his memoir in 2020, and now he's written a version for young adult readers, something he's uniquely qualified to do as a former middle school drama teacher. The book is called I Have Something to Tell You, and Chasten will be in Des Moines this weekend on stage, 2 p.m. Saturday at Franklin Junior High Event Center in a ticketed event sponsored by Beaverdale Books. And he's with me now. Chasten, welcome.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for being here. And now you came out with the memoir in 2020, and I take it from reading the end of the book that the young adult version was something you had always planned to do. Why was that something that was important to you?
Yeah, I really wanted to write the version of the book I wish I could travel back in time and hand my younger self. I did not have books like this growing up. I didn't really have any queer role models growing up. And I spent a lot of my life, 18, 20 years believing, I was the only gay person or I would never find love or no community. And I really wanted to write the version that I could have used when I was younger and a version that I was hoping that would be helpful for parents and teachers as well.
Now, you grew up in Traverse City, Michigan, northern Michigan, the northern part of the Lower Peninsula.
Yes.
And tell me a little bit about life in Traverse City when you were a kid.
Yeah, a couple people have made the Leave It to Beaver reference. It was just it was a quaint childhood. I mean, growing up on the lake, fishing with my dad and farming in 4-H and growing up in the country, there were a lot of elements of my childhood that were beautiful and serene. But the problem was I had to pretend to be a different version of myself to blend in. I was convinced that, my 4-H group or my church group or the peers at school would ostracize me, make fun of me, or even worse if they found out that I was gay. And so it's a beautiful area of the country. I'm so glad that Peter and I live here now. But just growing up at the time, it felt like you had to be a very specific version of yourself to fit in.
You had two older brothers, and your family
hmm
was very close. You mentioned going fishing with your dad. When you were growing up, did you have that sense that you were different from your brothers?
Oh, 100%. They were like the roughneck kids with dad. They were always hunting and fishing and fixing tractors and trucks. And I like to sing and dance and, put on shows in the basement. And while I really leaned into things like 4-H, I took it so seriously because I was convinced that I could distract everyone from my difference if I, was winning the blue ribbons at the county fair. But I knew right away, from many of my earliest memories, that I was very different from everyone in my family.
How old were you when you first began to think you might be gay?
Yeah, I think it was right around like fourth or fifth grade. I could recognize that something was different, but I didn't have any language for it. And we didn't talk about LGBTQ people growing up. It was not a reality that I was even aware of until later in life. Um, but I definitely was starting to realize that everyone was talking about crushes on girls, and that's not how I was feeling. Especially by the time I made it to like the sixth grade boys basketball team, I just knew that I was very different.
You are, I already talked about your charisma and your enthusiasm. I mean, you're such at least your public persona is incredibly likable. And it's so hard to imagine you being a lonely kid, but you did have a hard time fitting in.
Yeah, one of the reasons I write about that loneliness and I really want readers to come along on that journey with me is so that perhaps they themselves will know that someone has been through it, that even though there is isolation or fear, um, those things don't define you. Sometimes it's your immediate surroundings or the opinions of other people. Those things don't define you. But I wanted the reader to know, hey, I've been there, and it was really dark. And there were times when I was terrified, worried that I would never make it. But I did, and then I, came into the realization that there are millions and millions of other people like me.
You also, although you were not out in middle school or high school, being gay was not something you talked about. You did experience bullying because of your perceived sexuality. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, there was so much wrapped up in identity and masculinity in high school. You know, high school's tough, whether you're LGBTQ or not, but the perception of difference was terrifying. That if anyone thought that you were remotely different, then you might get picked on. And so that was a common, you know, some of those homophobic slurs were common phrases tossed around in the hallway or the locker room. If anyone perceived you to be different or weaker,
Right. And
not
they,
as
they
good at
weren't even
athletics.
necessarily because someone suspected that you were gay. Those were the kinds of terms that were used to insult anybody who was perceived
Anybody.
as different or weaker in some way.
Yeah, and the joke was that if you were gay, then you were weaker,
Right.
right? The being gay was the joke. And so that when I was starting to really come into um, understanding that, yes, this is probably true, the only things I was really learning about it was that it was bad or it was sinful or, I grew up in the age of Matthew Shepard, a young college student who was taken and beaten and tied up to a fence post and left for dead because his abductors panicked when they thought he was gay. That was so formative for me because I was growing up around a lot of pickup trucks and fence posts
Yeah.
too. And it was the slurs in the hallway and news items like Matthew Shepard that just told me, you cannot, you cannot stick your neck out here. And I had to focus more on surviving and blending in and being a version of myself that I thought would make my family proud, wouldn't distract at church or in 4-H. And so I just kept my head down.
What year did you graduate from high school?
2007.
Okay. So, so much has changed in the last 20 years with regards to
Yeah.
LGBTQ plus rights and awareness.
Hmm.
And I think it helps to kind of place in time how different even 2007 was, because you talk about not having gay role models. I mean, there were a couple things that had been very high profile. Will and Grace was on
Right.
television. Ellen DeGeneres had come out, but those were maybe the only things that were happening. So when you looked around the world, when you saw Ellen on TV, did that make you think, well, maybe there's a brighter future for me?
Yeah, in the book, I write about how it was Ellen and Will and Grace for me. And watching Will and Grace was like therapy and torture at the same time because I saw someone like me on TV and I was afraid if I laughed too hard, then my family would suspect something was up. And I used to watch Ellen with my mom after school, and she liked Ellen. She laughed along with Ellen. It wasn't like she was laughing at Ellen, and it kind of gave me hope that maybe it was a possibility. But it also seemed like something that you could have if you were, in Los Angeles or New York, if you were in Hollywood, but a young queer kid in northern Michigan couldn't be gay.
Yeah,
And then there was the aspect of safety.
right.
So these were celebrities on television, and I'm just trying to survive high school.
I recently read Ari Shapiro. He's an NPR host. I read his memoir, and he's a little older than you, but
Yeah.
he is also gay. And he wrote about how when he realized he was gay, and he really didn't have any gay role models, he was coming of age, on the tail end of really the horrors of the AIDS epidemic. And so when he
Yeah.
looked at the future, he couldn't see a happy ending for a man who was gay. He just saw death and despair. When you
Hmm.
were when you were a kid and you were trying to come to terms with this, did you think that everything you dreamed of, all of your happiness was possibly over?
That was the hardest part. I didn't see it. I didn't see college. I didn't see family. I didn't see love. I didn't see being a parent because I was just sort of told that that was impossible if you were gay or worse. Um, that was talking about Ari's experience and witnessing the tail end of the AIDS epidemic. That was one of the ignorant questions I was asked more than once. Once I finally came out, was whether or not I had AIDS, because that for some people was just the assumption
Right.
that
The
all gay
only thing
people would
they
have
knew.
AIDS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a lot of teenagers, you wanted to escape your small town. That's very relatable to people from any background, I think. And you found a way to escape. Your senior year of high school, you managed to win an opportunity, a scholarship opportunity to go study in Germany for the year.
Yeah.
What did that mean to you?
It changed everything. It wasn't that I was, dead set on studying German language and culture. I had taken German for a few years and I really wanted to experience Germany, but I really wanted out of my hometown and I wanted as far away from my family as possible. And when my German teacher explained that this was a fully funded scholarship, I knew that was the only way that a dream like that would ever happen. Um, and Germany is where I made really great friends. It's the first time I came out to someone, and someone affirmed my identity. And I thought all the walls were going to come crumbling in when I finally spat the words out. And their reaction was so nonchalant. It was the first time I had someone in my life. I was like, yeah, cool, that's great. It doesn't change my opinion about you. And it gave me enough confidence to come home, and eventually come out back home.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. I am talking with Chasten Buttigieg. He has published a young adult version of his memoir. It's called I Have Something to Tell You. And he'll be in Des Moines on Saturday on stage at 2 p.m. at Franklin Junior High Event Center in a ticketed event sponsored by Beaverdale Books. We will talk more in a moment. This is Talk of Iowa from IPR News. It's Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. I'm talking with Chasten Buttigieg. You probably know him as the husband of our U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. And, of course, a lot of Iowans got to know Chasten pretty well back when he was campaigning for Mayor Pete in the lead up to the 2020 caucuses, which Pete Buttigieg won. He is coming back to Iowa on Saturday. He'll be at Franklin Junior High Events Center in Des Moines in a ticketed event sponsored by Beaverdale Books. And he's coming to talk about his memoir. He published a version of his memoir in 2020, but he just published a new one for young adults. It's called I Have Something to Tell You. And Chasten, just before the break, we were talking about how you spent your senior year of high school in Germany. And that was the first time you told someone you were gay. And this person responded in a kind and loving way. It didn't change how they felt about you. So when you came home, and I need to really underscore, as much as you were a teenager who wanted to escape home and felt isolated at home, you also really had a very deep love for your family and very close relationship with your family. So coming home must have been so confusing in so many ways because coming home must have felt so good and so bad at the same time.
Yeah, I remember walking down the arrivals ramp at Cherry Capital Airport, Traverse City, Michigan, and seeing my friends and family with balloons and welcome home signs. And my mom was crying because she was so excited to see me. And I just knew that I was coming home to break her heart again. And it was very hard to look them in the eye. And I only lasted a month or so, I think. Because I went right back into the closet, pretended everything was fine, tried to date a girl again. It was awful. And it was just breaking me because I had felt what it was like to crack open that closet door and to just breathe. And then I went right back in and I didn't want to be in there anymore. And I thought my two options were end it or come out and maybe lose everything.
Yeah. How did you tell your parents?
I wrote a letter. I could not say it out loud. And my dad wasn't home. I had no idea how to come out to my dad. But I had already packed my bags. I was convinced that they'd hate me. My mom was folding laundry in the living room. I remember it so vividly. The clothes were hanging on the line off the back deck. The windows were open. It was a nice sunny summer day. And I walked into the living room and I handed her the envelope and I just said, I'm sorry. And then I ran. I left.
You felt so certain that you wouldn't be welcome in your home anymore, that you left before even having a conversation with your parents.
Yeah. And this is a really important story to tell. In the book, I write about how my fear and my assumptions led me to run away. my parent never said, no son of mine's gay, get out of this house, never want to see you again, which is common for some people.
Yeah.
I was so embarrassed and convinced that this would be embarrassing for them too, that their friends would make fun of them. My dad would lose business. He's a small business owner. And my mom called me after I had ran away and asked why I ran. And I was so convinced that I was ruining everything. And eventually my mom had learned that I was sleeping in my car and couch surfing with friends. And my mom knew nothing about raising a gay son. She knew nothing, but she wanted me alive. And so she called me and told me to come home, and that we would figure it out. And we did. My parents they are wonderful people, such great allies and grandparents. But at the time, they did me the biggest favor in asking me to come home and committing to doing the work. And they asked all the right questions and the wrong questions and the embarrassing questions, but they wanted to make it work.
You write about coming out to your grandma, and it's such a
Yeah.
beautiful moment. Would you tell us about that?
Oh yeah. After I came out slowly to everyone in the family, which by the way is so silly. I don't know why we make people feel like they are obligated to come out, but that was kind of how it felt then. It's just like I have to go on this apology tour,
Yeah.
and everyone kept saying, just don't tell grandma, it'll kill her. Just don't tell grandma, it'll kill her. But that was the same line over and over again. It's like, I don't want to kill my grandma. But I couldn't stand this woman that I loved so much not knowing this about. I didn't know why. I just felt so compelled to tell her. I wanted her to know. I wanted her to know me. And it was a holiday. I asked grandma to go for a walk, and we wound up in the front seat of her Buick Regal. And I couldn't even get the words out. I just fell apart in tears. And I said, Grandma, and I couldn't even finish the sentence. And she reached her hand across the center console and gripped my arm really tight. I was staring at her rosary dangling in the rearview mirror and feeling her rings dig into my arm. And she just said, oh, I know, Chasten. And I love you just the same.
Wow.
Yeah.
In your memoir, you don't just write about what it was to be a gay man growing up. You also write about your challenges finding your way as a college student and figuring out what you want to do with your life. And some of that was because you were trying to figure out who you were and how to be a gay man. But also some of that is because you were a first-generation college student and you didn't know what you wanted to do with your life. So,
Yeah.
I mean, again, this is such an important part of the story because you didn't struggle with that just because of your struggles with your own identity. You struggled with that because that's a really, really hard part of life, especially as a first-generation college student. It feels important to tell that story too.
Oh, yeah. I was a mess. I mean, I was not ready for college at all, but that's kind of what was sold to us as the ticket out, right? You either leave on a football scholarship or an athletic scholarship, or you go to college. And it just felt like that's what you were supposed to do. You're supposed to get out of Traverse City. And I couldn't even think about going to a university. I enrolled in the community college. That's when I had just come out to my family. And my first semester at community college, that's when I was sleeping in the back of my car and on friends' couches. And I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to study. I was surviving.
Yeah.
And I was working full time. And and I took financial aid at face value. I thought, if this is how I achieve my American dream, then I have to get this degree. And I just wasn't ready. And I wish I would have had a mentor who told me that I didn't have to rush off to college. That's not what you have to do. Take some time, learn more about yourself, find the things that make you feel alive or that feed your soul. But that's not what I had. And even at that time, I loved theater, but everyone was also saying, you got to get a job that'll pay the bills. And so
Right. That is not practical.
I was trying to study nursing, and I was working as a nursing assistant at the hospital. And it just, I shouldn't have gone to college, but that's what I was told I needed to do. Sometimes I think back now and like, now I'm ready for college.
Well,
now I can go to college,
Right. You did eventually find your place in college, in your third institution of higher learning. You found your place, you found your people, and you found your confidence.
I did, and I'm so grateful for that. But it was a long road and a bumpy road. But like I write in the book that I want younger people to know is that there's no finish line. It was constantly sold to us as, just do this and then the real work happens, and then the real life starts. But everyone's pushing you through college, and then you just graduate with student debt and you're told to get a job and pay your bills. And we were all just rushing towards nothing.
Yeah. Although you have kind of a fairy tale story waiting for you after
Then things
you
took a turn.
right
They
after you
definitely
get
took a turn.
through
Yeah.
all of that. And I think a lot of people don't actually realize how recently married you and Pete
Oh,
were
yeah.
when you were campaigning in Iowa. I mean, you guys were newlyweds at that point.
Yeah, it came out of nowhere. The campaign came out of nowhere. I don't think either of us saw it 6 months before it happened. And yeah, we were married in June of 2018, and we're driving to Iowa. uh, I think that first trip we took to Iowa we drove Pete's Jeep just together from Indiana.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
to suddenly go from being newlyweds, I mean, and of course, Pete was the mayor of South Bend, so you were already a somewhat high profile couple, at least in South Bend, Indiana. But suddenly you are on the national stage.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that was so moving for so many people was to see two men in such a respectful, loving, open relationship, openly showing your affection for each other and talking about each other and in such a public way. Even in 2019, that was something kind of new to see.
Yeah, that's not lost on me, what that can do when you just live your life authentically. And it was one of the aspects of the campaign that really meant a lot to me, was the goodness that can come by virtue of just showing up and just being yourself.
You have also now become a father, and this
Yeah.
this book doesn't really talk about that part of your life. Young adults probably aren't that interested
Yeah.
in what it's like to raise twins. All
Yeah,
of
that's a
the-
different book, I think.
Right, and I'm really looking forward to that one. So please write that one. You've got a few years of work yet before you could probably write that book, but
Oh, yeah.
when you think about it, I mean, you've been traveling all over the country. You've been to over 30 cities talking about this book. You know that young people are reading it. You know that people are putting this in the hands of young people. What do you want young people to take away from your story?
One of the biggest things I wish younger me would have known was that I wasn't defined by those opinions of my peers or my surroundings, and that I didn't need to care so much about the opinions of other people. But I was so convinced that their opinions were the only opinions that mattered. I never even thought about my opinion of myself. I was just trying to make my parents proud and blend in at school and do whatever I thought would keep me safe and help me blend in. And I don't want young people to do that. I want young people to know that it is okay to be different. It's okay to be unique. It's okay if you're not like everybody else. And even if you're the only one, this will not be forever. That feeling of isolation or loneliness, whether you're questioning if it will ever add up to more than what it is today, this book is my way of saying yes, it does get better. And I remember when people would tell me that when I was younger, and I thought it just sounded like a bunch of baloney, because I kept asking when. Well, when does it get better?
Right.
Because it's not better today. Is it going to be better tomorrow? But it does get better. And the thing that I didn't know was that there are millions and millions of people out here supporting you and fighting for you, even if you can't see them in your backyard.
The world has changed a lot in the last 20 years. And in some communities, I live in a very liberal town, and if you go to any of the high schools, there's the Colors Club. There are so many kids who are embracing their identities and being very open about them. There are also more identities than there were when I was a kid and when you
Yeah.
were a kid. So in some ways, the world has gotten so much more tolerant and open. And yet at the same time, here in Iowa and in many states, we are seeing legislation, in particularly targeting those with trans identities. I mean, this is a really
Absolutely.
unique moment in time. What do you feel is at stake right now?
There's so much on the line. I remember when I came to Iowa and I went to the Iowa Safe Schools summer camp for LGBTQ teens, and your governor wrote a proclamation recognizing it as an important program, a safe space for vulnerable young people, highlighting it as one of the things that she was most proud of in Iowa, that there was an organization committed to keeping kids alive and giving LGBTQ teens a summer camp experience where they could be safe to be themselves. And now you would never believe that she wrote that proclamation, because attacking LGBTQ people just seems to be the topic du jour for the GOP, for the clicks, the cash, the clout, whatever they can do to avoid doing the real work. And that comes on the backs of young, vulnerable people. It's hard enough being a teenager as it is, but imagine what it's like today to look up and see adults, elected officials, attacking you, attacking your identity, your humanity, rather than focusing on all of the other things that Iowans probably want their public officials to focus on. And so we just have an obligation as the adults in the room. As parents, you might have to go to a school board meeting. They're not all terrible. You might have to go to a city council meeting. You might have to run for office. You might have to back up your teacher who's trying to make sure that there is an inclusive curriculum in the school. But I don't think any of us thought that we would backslide this far, this fast. But it is useful to our friends on the other side of the aisle, because they can divide and divide and divide by using hatred. And especially when it comes to things like our transgender community, a lot of people don't know a transgender American, maybe have never met a transgender person. And so they're getting their information from elected officials who have some political agendas at hand, dividing people with that fear. And right now, I think it's just really important to ask ourselves, if you consider yourself an ally, have you given yourself that title, or have you earned it? Because there are a lot of people who need you to step up right now.
It feels like there's a big generational divide as well. As I said, the world changed a lot since you were a kid and since I was a kid. And even people who consider themselves allies may not understand or be very comfortable with non-binary identities and trans identities.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a learning curve because the language has changed. And so
sure.
what is your message to people who they want to be supportive but don't understand?
Well, the first thing that you should know is, if you are supportive and you want to understand, thank you, because people really need you right now. And understand that you might mess up or you might say the wrong thing. And if someone corrects you, just take it as a gift. Don't take it as a scolding, but just an opportunity to see somebody more fully and to be more inclusive and bigger hearted. I think that's what we all just want: the freedom to live our lives, the freedom to exist, the freedom to raise our families, the freedom to know love and community. And just because somebody else gets a piece of the pie doesn't mean you lose yours. And maybe the language is changing, and it feels like there are more identities. And that's just because more people feel that freedom of inclusion and community. And I think that's great, especially for young people. I want to keep young people alive. And if using a name or a pronoun or just being a kind person can help save someone's life, shouldn't we all want that? And if you do have questions, seek out the answers to that questions before you jump online with opinions, or before you pile on. Remember that you're talking about people's lives. These aren't characters on the internet. You're talking about real people.
Chasten Buttigieg, thank you so much for talking with me.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Chasten Buttigieg, he is the author of I Have Something to Tell You. It's a memoir about growing up gay in Michigan, and he's just published a version for young adults. He'll be in Des Moines on Saturday, 2 p.m. at Franklin Junior High Event Center, in a ticketed event sponsored by Beaverdale Books. This is Talk of Iowa from IPR News.